your comments or your questions in the chat, and we will get to you in a couple of breaks. Everything else we'll talk about after.
All right, great. Thank you for coming, you guys, and braving the weather. I want to congratulate the people that are here because Yupo is such an intense medium that being in person is important. What you're going to see here or see at home is a shadow of the actual brilliance of the color and intensity that you get. And that's one of the things that attract me and other people to the medium. Kudos to you guys. Let me also quickly digress and thank the Minnesota Watercolor Society. It is a fabulous organization. When I first got started in watercolor 25 years ago, the first thing I did at a friend's recommendation was join the society. And it hooked me up not only with these kinds of demos and workshops, but a cohort of people I've known ever since and have become close friends and painted with. So I owe the Minnesota Watercolor Society a great debt, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to demo for them. I can't ask questions of the people at home, but how many people here paint in Yupo? Yeah, okay. I teach Yupo, and I've been teaching it for 5 or 6 years now, and I get a lot of repeat people coming back to my class to do it again. But people who haven't taken my class before will usually say either they don't paint in it or they tried it and they didn't like it. So I would encourage you to consider trying it. The first time I tried it, I didn't like it. It is not at all like painting on paper. On the other hand, I have done at least a half a dozen or more classes, and the students' results from the classes are very striking. I mean, they take them home and they frame them, and people love them. And it's not because I'm a great teacher, it's because it's such a fun medium to experiment with, to play with, and it's so different than what we're used to with a well-planned, light to dark, big to small watercolor, which is carefully planned out ahead of time. If you take a look around at some of the artwork that I've brought in, I brought a lot of it in because I wanted to show you the variety of ways that you can work with Yupo, that you can paint realistically, you can paint completely abstractly. And what I want to do today, in an hour, it's hard for me to do a fabulous painting, but I want to give you some idea of how you can work with Yupo that's different than putting paint on paper. And what it amounts to is letting the watercolor move around and mix and flow, and then being able to lift it off the paper. One of the hallmarks of Yupo is you can wet your finger and wipe the paint off down to white paper. I mean, not completely true with some of the staining colors, but even with the staining colors and a little effort, you can get back to white paper, which is not true of paper, at least not without a lot more work. And that enables you to do a lot of things that you can't do otherwise. You can be you can work like an opaque painter does. Paint light into dark, paint completely change compositions, wipe out part of the painting and replace it. Do lots of things that you can't do with working on paper, and it gives you a sense of freedom and abstraction. A lot of the paintings that I do start out completely abstract. In fact, I'd say the vast majority of watercolor of Yupos I do start out completely abstract, and then form themselves into something with more design and intent as I go through it. And that's what I'm going to do today. I don't really have anything much in mind other than to demonstrate how I work with Yupo on paper, and we'll see if we can come up with a painting. Yupo, unlike paper, is inorganic. It's plastic. It doesn't swell when it gets wet. It doesn't wrinkle when it gets wet. You don't have to tape down all the edges and wet the paper and shrink it. You'll see all I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack the corners to a rigid surface, and I'm done prepping. That's all you have to do. If you have old Yupo that has been handled, You can get fingerprints on it, and some people will wipe it down with alcohol to get all the fingerprints off, because wherever you have a fingerprint, the paint won't want to go. If I see that, I just rub on it a little bit and it goes away. I like to paint on Yupo with intense colors because of the fact that it really lends itself to that. So I tend to use liquid watercolors. There's nothing different about these watercolors. They're the very same as the tube watercolors, only they're dissolved for you, and they tend to be intense right out of the bucket. So I don't have to scrub and get color put on. I did a workshop with Mark Mahaffey about 10 years ago, and he just takes his tube watercolors and squirts them on the page and then uses them like that. And to get the same effect, to get the density and intensity of color. So what I'm going to do, these are Doc Martens Hydrus watercolors. They're not inks, they're watercolors, and they behave very much like the watercolors out of your tube. The phthalo stain, the organics tend to granulate. You get the same kind of effect, but because it's intense, you can just put it right on there and get an intense color. And like I said, I don't have a map today, but this is actually how I work. I'll take and say, I'm going to paint warm today. The majority of my painting is going to be in that warm spectrum. So I'm going to start out putting some warm colors down. And I'm going to create an abstract pattern that I'm then going to let talk to me. It's very common for me when I'm doing a painting to not have an image in mind, but to see what happens as I'm working, and to try to listen to the painting and work with what's happening on there. That isn't always true. There's some times when I have a very clear pattern I want to do. If you'll see some of the figures that I have, they come out of abstraction, but they're usually planned ahead of time. Let's just see. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a little bit of water on my brush. Look at how, can you see how brilliant this is? You're not going to see it on there, but if you look at it on here, you get a very bright color. And I'm going to move it around a little, and I'll try to hold it up for you. If I forget to do that for a while, you remind me, because what you're seeing here is not going to be what I'm seeing here in terms of color intensity. I was saying the last time I did a demo, we did it in a dark church, and the color was so bad on the screen that at the end of the demo, when I held it up, people just went, that isn't what we were looking at the whole time. And that can happen. So what I'm doing, and if you can see, I'm creating an abstract pattern, and I'm trying to create these shapes that don't overlap too much. If I've got a color up here, I'm not going to just blend it in with everything else. I'm going to let that happen more organically. And I like that color, but I don't like that color intensity. Well, I think that one's empty. Okay. I go through a lot of paint, as you can see. This liquid watercolor doesn't last me forever. Warm that up down there. Right now, I'm just covering the paper with paint. Now let's get a little bit of a cool color in a few places. And let that blend into get one of the things I see quite often with alcohol inks is people become enamored of the look of the abstraction that the ink gives you when it flows and so forth. And you'll see that same kind of thing here. And I warn people not to get too wrapped up in that. If you have a passage that you really like, obviously you want to save it, but that painting should be intentional in my mind, that there should be an aspect to it that's controlled. And you guys just had a workshop with Dan Weimer. How many saw Dan demo last month? Dan is fabulous. Not only is he unique, not only are his paintings not like anyone else's, but he has such a strong sense of design, and they're carefully planned, and they have everything a painting should have. And I want to think that when I'm painting, I'm thinking about design and pattern and so forth. Ultimately, and you see how bright that is, how colorful it is. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to let some of these paints move around a little. By spraying them a little bit, I can make them more mobile, and I'll let them blend a little bit on the page. I'm going to try to keep some cool, warm areas here. I'm going to let some of these darks come down into there a little bit. And this is the fun part of this, where you're just playing. And I'm trying to, I don't know if people at home can see, and I'll put it back down in just a second, but I wanted you to see this process of letting it move around. Can I, if I do it under here, we're tilting the paper, we're letting it move and flow, trying to get some patterns going in. Now, at this point, if I say, gosh, it's kind of all the same through here, I want to change it, I can take all the paint out of my brush and I can move it around. I can say, I'm going to move some of this around, and I'm just going to create a lighter passage coming through here because I feel the need for that. Or, and this is really fun, I can take a squeegee and I can move the paint around. So you have the opportunity to do linear marks like this, to do smaller marks like this at this wet stage. And where you've cleaned off the page, then you can put in something else. Let's say, I think we need some more light over in this pattern. So I'm going to come in there with that. And I want a clean brush. See how I can bring the lights over into that dark area? I'm messy too. I'll have to. And I'm going to pick up some cerulean here and just drop it in a few places. Cerulean I like in the dark areas, especially. It kind of tends to push the other paint away. Another of my favorite colors, which doesn't come in the liquids, is Andrew's turquoise. And I know I have some here somewhere. Let me think. What did I do? I hit a box with Andrew's turquoise in it. Oh, well, I'll find it later and we'll do some more with that. But I'm working wet into wet here, and I'm playing with pattern. I love what's going on up in here where that blue and red are mixing. I like the fact that I have a warm passage coming through here. As you can see, I brought my homemade tilted support in here so that I could do paint at an angle, because I always paint at an angle. See how this is flowing down here? Can you see that on the screen? This dark coming down into there, and I can tilt it and create pattern with that. All right, so wet into wet. I'll work wet into wet often for quite a while. I'm going to take some of this cerulean, and I'm going to get a clean brush without any water. I'm going to drop them up in here. I might just push some away. See how bright you can make that? Just pushing that paint away with the dry-ish brush. Now this is coming up into here, and I want to save that, I think. So I'm going to switch over here, and I'm getting lots of fun stuff going on here. Now, so I've showed how you can move paint with your brush. I've showed how you can scrape it away with a what do you call it? A squeegee. But you can also take, and here I have this has a pattern on it. And I can take and go into one of these areas and just print that pattern on there. See how cool that is? It works best in a dark area where you can, and some of that will disappear as we go on, but some of it will stay behind. And a lot of what we're doing in this stage of the painting is creating pattern, creating interesting abstract pattern that will be, play into what we're going to do later. I can fold this up and go in here and do something like this too, where I get an odd looking pattern. At this point, and I don't think I'm going to do it because it takes a long time, you can take wax paper or you can take saran wrap, just like you can with watercolor, and put it down and let it sit there and create pattern too. And I do that. I'm trying to think if I have any examples here of it. Probably not. But I do that, and I like that effect for later on. Kind of cool. You see this? I'm seeing some need for some more of that bright red up in there. So I'm gonna take again a little red on my glass palette here.
This, my friends, is more than just a card. Use it anywhere. Debit, MasterCard is accepted.
I'm just gonna go in there and drop some in.
Get this. Direct deposit.
I've got some red up in here. I got some red up in here. I just want some down in this area too.
Do you feel worse?
A little bit.
Nothing magical about any of these patterns. I'm just kind of responding to what I'm seeing. And when you spatter it at this point, it blends and it moves and it does all kinds of pretty unpredictable things, which I love. I really want to find that turquoise. What did I do with that? No. Sorry. I do this all the time at home too. Okay, so now this is the wet into wet piece, and what I'm going to do now is let it dry a little bit, and I'll assist that with a hair dryer. And one of the things I want you to notice, and I'll hold this up for everybody, but where I scraped a line, the paint is coming to that and it's acting like a barrier and it's not going past it. And so it creates a different kind of a pattern. And I like that linear aspect to it. I like some of these whites coming in. I like this pattern of flowing into color. I like these little spots of color that are coming out. So this is right now, in the way I look at stuff, very successful start. Now I'll do a lot of starts, and not all of them will become paintings, but what I'm looking for is an interesting pattern in color. I like to have some darks, and you'll notice we've got some very intense darks here, because I can go into those darks and create light patterns, not like you can in watercolor. When you put in watercolor and it's that dark, it's probably going to stay that dark. But in Yupo, it gives me an opportunity to lift out and create pattern in those areas as well. So let's take one other thing I want to show you is some texturing while it's still wet. This I got out of a little paint, I use rollers like these sometimes, and this came with that. It's got a wonderful texture to it. And I can go into one of these dark areas and lift it and put it down somewhere else in another form of texture, especially when it's wet like this. It's going to change with time, but you'll still see the sense that you created texture there. And anytime I do something one place, I want to do it at least one other place so that it's got some coherency. So texturing with stamping here, I've got lots of different, I've got a whole folder full of different textures. This one has, it's a piece of paper with a wavy surface. You guys are welcome to come up and look at these later, but this will give you kind of a wavy texture, and it all depends on how wet things are when you do it. If they're real wet, they're going to tend to go away. And let's see that other texture has pretty much gone away at this point because it's so wet. All right. I don't really have anything here in mind other than trying to create an interesting pattern. Lights, darks, cools, warms. I'm still staying fairly warm through here with the surrounding cools, which is kind of what my initial intent was. Every once in a while, I'll do a painting, and when I get to this stage, it says, oh my gosh, that's a duck, or that's a horse, or something like that. And it'll take me in a different direction. My best example of that, I think I did a painting and it looked like the back end of a horse to me. I'll find it. And so I threw a little head peeking around with the back end of the horse, and it turned out great. I sold it immediately. But I just said, well, that's a horse, and it talks to you. And it's important at some point to start listening. And I'm not really listening to much other than just abstract pattern right now. See how fun that is to just push the color aside? You can take and you have to have a clean brush, and you don't want a lot of water in it. So I keep going over here and taking the water out. But I can pick up a color and just put it in, push that dark aside. Even over in this area, I can do the same thing. I can create pattern and light that comes into these darks. And I can really do that at any time, but it's most easy right now while everything's a little bit wet. Of course. Well, it stays wet longer than it would with paper because the paper isn't absorbing it. And especially when I'm working in a humid studio, I'll use a dryer a lot. If I'm working in a real dry area, it dries really fast. So it depends on where you're at. I don't paint plein air very often. In fact, I've done very few plein air paintings in Yupo, but they can dry really fast depending on where you're at. I actually have a plein air painting here somewhere. Oh, this one. It's not big enough for you to really see, but this is a painting I did on Artist Point up in Grand Marais, and you can see it's very Yupo-like, but it was a lot of fun to do. Yeah. Core, C-O-R-E? No. Q-O-R. Is it a type of pigment? Oh, I haven't. Is it a good one? Oh, okay. No, I'd love to try it. As you can tell, I like trying new things. This is getting a little bit more disorganized than I like. I'm going to try and dry stuff here. And then I'm going to dry into wet for a little bit. My dryer doesn't stretch very far. Sorry, this is the boring part of the presentation. Oh, I know. There's one other thing I should demonstrate for you before it's completely dry. And that's people like to control what they're doing. And there is a way to control this and do a flat wash. And that's to use a roller. If you take one of these foam rollers and you wash over an area, let me pick an area out. Let's pick right here. I can turn that into a flat wash. Take all the texture and color change and everything else out of it, and it just becomes a flat area. You see that? You can make flat washes with this, and you can control it. And you'll see in some of my paintings, I do that, where my goal is to create a rest area where I don't have all this change and patterning going on. And you know, it can be very effective as a counter. Excuse me. The thing you want to remember is when you're using a roller, and you don't have paint on it, you're picking up paint. Okay, so things are going to get lighter. As you do it, you're going to diminish the color intensity and the value of it, as well as away the texture. So you want to be sure you're doing it in an area where you want that to happen. Oh, I don't like that at all. That was a dumb thing to do. See, I can take a paper towel too and wipe. At this point, just wipe the paint off it. If I say, oh, I don't like this area, I'm going to wipe that off and I'm going to do something else there. And you can't do that in watercolor without creating all kinds of issues. So I'm come in here with some phthalo that's similar to what's going on over here. And just replace that area. Okay, maybe we'll put some blue in here too. And I'll hit it with a little water to blend it with what's around it. And voila, I changed that area to something it wasn't before. And it's that easy with this. I go back into this area just a little bit. Okay, now that looks like a mess, right? Wait till you see the end result. This is when I teach Yupo, the title of the class is Fun with Yupo. And it is fun because we're playing. I mean, you're not stressed out because it isn't a great painting yet. Although I have seen a lot of students at this point fall in love with what they have and frame it and put it on the wall. Obviously, that's not the case with this one. But I've seen the last class I took, the gentleman was painting, and it had this wonderful kind of underwater feel to it. It was all blues and turquoises and some warm patterns coming through. And we talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And finally, we lifted a whale out coming up. And it was a striking painting. I tell them, you put that in the Minnesota Watercolor Society show, you'll get an award. It was really cool. And it was about 98% accidental, but it worked. All right, now I'm getting to the point where this is mostly dry. And I don't want it any drier than that because I want to show you something else you can do with rollers. If you take a clean roller and you go over an area that's partially dry, like I said, it'll lift the wet parts and not the dry parts so much. So I can go in here and lift. I don't know if you can see this, but where I had some wet parts, I'm getting lighter. In this blue area, this middle part's kind of wet, so I can take and lift that. It got a little past where I wanted it to demonstrate this, but I'm burnishing a few areas here. Now, here's where one of the fun parts come in, and that is creating texture in it once it's dry. And if you look at some of these other paintings, and I apologize to the people at home, you see these patterns in the watercolor here. Those are created by lifting, stamping, and replacing color using various stencils. Okay. This is one of my favorite stencils. I wish I could tell you where I got it. I've had it for years. It's got all these spirals in it. In almost every Yupo painting I've done, you'll see this somewhere because it's kind of like a signature. What you do with it, and I forgot to bring my magic eraser, but you can just use a clean paper towel. I go through a lot of paper towels too. You can put this down and you can go in and you can lift out. I don't want it too wet. See that? You just lift that out. I'll show you in a minute what else you can do with that, because I went from dark to light, but you can go light to dark too. You can go into a light pattern with this and roll in a texture. And I'm going to take the water off of it. And like I said, so if I do it one place, I like to do it at least one other. And I do use magic eraser for this a lot. It doesn't shred the way the paper towel does when you rub it through here, but it has the same effect. So there's another area of lifting. Another pattern that I like are this rectangular pattern, and you'll see this in a lot of my paintings as well. It's kind of a something that I use often. So again, I'm working light into dark right now. So I'm going to pick a dark area, and I'm going to show you another way to texture. I'm going to take one of these rollers, and I'm going to dampen it just a little bit. Just enough so that I don't want water dripping out of it like that. But I'm going to go over and just roll over this area with a slightly damp roller and pick up a little bit more subtle a pattern with it. Let me do a little bit more of that. Can you see that? I don't know how well it's showing up there, but I'm creating some textures into some of these areas. Now, once you've created a lift like that, and let's try a different texture. I try to limit myself to not using every stencil I own on a given painting. But for this purpose, for a demo, use more than I would usually use. And I'm going to go into, typically I will look for an area that already has some color interest, and I'll say that that's going to be kind of my center of interest. So I'll do more texturing and more patterning in one area than another, and leave some, like some of these, a little more natural. And I'm looking at this area right in here as being maybe the more interesting part. So I'm going to go in here to this one. And what this does is it takes everything but a little border away and gives you an opportunity to go in and change the color within that. This is another one I really like, that, and I know it's hard to see that at home, but well, if you want to come up and look at, come in and connect this one with this one a little bit.
Say, Jim, one of the people at home are asking if you make your own stencils or how you might be able to.
All of these square stencils, Deb Zeller made for me. We had bought some and they were flimsy and they fell apart, and she found somebody who had a very sturdy stencil maker with a laser cutter, and so I got a bunch of these from her. All the rest of them came from either online, or Wet Paint has a lot of these smaller ones that I use in kind of, I like the organic patterned ones as opposed to the rigid designs for the most part, and they have a lot of them. So yeah, you can buy them in a lot of different places. This one has a whole bunch of little tiny circles, and if you look at, I don't know if it's probably too small to see, and I don't have the painting, but I had a maybe put like this so people can see it at home. I had an image of water reflecting lights. This is from a sailing trip I was on. My friend was in the dinghy and holding onto the dock. There were all these beautiful sparkling textures in the water, and I just lifted and repainted and lifted and repainted and lifted and repainted until I got all kinds of little dots that create a kind of a pointillist image. And so that's one use. Some paintings, and this painting is in the Arboretum show, if you can see that, of an eagle. There's no stencils at all. It's just lifting and patterning and creating organics from using tissues and so forth. So don't always stencil. This is a good example of a painting. This is also in the Arb show right now, where you wouldn't even hardly notice any of the stencils, but if you look closely, there's lots of little textures within these shapes that come from the stencils and create a kind of a counterplay to the just painted image. And that's one of the things that obviously Yupo does for you. All right, so now where I've lifted, I can go back in and replace. I've got this red and I've got all these others. I'm going to show you two ways to do that. One is to just go in there and paint each of those individually, and one is to glaze. Now you can glaze Yupo. It's not easy and you have to follow certain rules, but you can glaze one color onto it. The way you do it is you only touch the paper once and you use a very soft brush. If you glaze and then you go over it again, you lift up everything below it. But I can go in and I can take and with one touch go by and leave behind that pattern that I left. If I went over it again now, it would lift it up. But I can do this and replace that. So I have this red has been replaced by this patterned yellow. The same over here. Let's go with a complement. That red is getting kind of messed up there. Where I have this green, I'm going to go in and glaze a red over it. And let's all find out at the same time what's going to happen. So now you can see that coming through. And if I wanted to, I could try another experiment. I do this a lot where I have no idea what's going to happen. So as a demo, it's maybe not the best idea, but what happened if we lifted that? Oh, that gives you kind of an interesting texture too. This, one of the things that's fun about teaching Yupo is that I learned so much because the students do stuff I would never think of doing. They well, what happens if you do this? These sets of watercolor come with a black and a white, and I never used either one of them because I didn't want to use that dull black on my painting. And one of them started dropping white into their painting, and it gives you this big blossom. It's like a flower, the white does. It was amazing to me. I said, well, wow, I'm going to have to try that sometime. So what I'm going to do is a little bit more of this texturing, and especially kind of maybe in this area, and then we'll do some direct painting on it. Doesn't this look like fun? Nothing wrong with pretty. Yeah. Now, this is just one way of working with Yupo, and I can tell you that I work a lot of different ways with it. But from a demonstration standpoint, this is a good way to talk about some of the options that you have. Creating flat texture, working wet into wet, using these patterns to create stuff. Now I'm going to go into one of these. I kind of glazed over that one, and it's gone away to some extent. And I'm just going to paint, since it's got a blue there. And this is a little bit tedious, but you can go in here and you can paint each of these little white areas. I don't know, is my head in the way for you? And you can create a different pattern, and you're just using that stencil to take off and try something different. And the same with these patterns in here. If I wanted to, I can go in and just use these as a takeoff. And let's say I don't want to go, I'll mix up some violet and go up here with violet. And you see how we're getting a lot of texture in this area, and that's kind of what I'm shooting for. And I can spend hours and hours playing with these. I'm not going to do that to you, I promise. We're going to get far enough on this process so you understand how I do this. And then I'm going to show you how one of the ways that you can take that to the next step. Excuse me. Yeah. It's much brighter in person than it is on the screen, and I apologize for that. Now I want to take one of these rectilinear ones, and I want to come in here and cut out some big squares and replace those. So just slightly damp. Oh yeah. You can remove it weeks later. So I created some pattern, and kind of almost an arrow pointing up there. And I can leave those white, or I can go in and replace color. And again, I'm still going largely light into dark. But let's do some dark into light too. I'm going to put a black pattern or a dark pattern over here by mixing up. Let's see, I think I have what is this? No, that's not what I want. Here. This is a very dark violet. And I'm going to take my roller here. I'm going to pick up some of that violet paint. And I'm going to go in here and create some dark on light. I'm going to do the same thing up here because I did it there. Yeah. Nobody said this was neat. Now, you can also direct paint. If you like to paint, you can just take your brush and paint on this. And I'll do a little bit of that too. Let's take some red violet here. I'm just looking at some of the pattern I see in here and following it along, creating an area. That flows down from up there and maybe includes some of this. Water is important with Yupo. You don't use as much water on Yupo as you would with paper because it isn't getting picked up and absorbed. You have to be careful about controlling your water on your brush. Yeah, no, I keep doing this because I'm taking the water out of my brush and trying to paint pretty pure pigment in there. Yeah, no, you want color intensity. That's why you're painting on Yupo in the first place. And I'm going to bring some of this color up into this area where I stamped these patterns in. I look at contrast too. If I'm painting into a blue green, I might go with a violet, or the yellow and the violet here, the red and the green, and try to get some vibration going like that. Now, let me get some dry. Let me just put some texture into this for fun. All right. Any questions about this process I'm doing? I'm sure you have questions about why, but how, the how part. Well, that's a really good question. It kind of depends on your purpose. What I'm looking to do today for you guys is this picture, and I apologize for the people at home. Can we aim the camera over here for a second? This is a painting that uses basically the same technique that I'm showing you. The first painting that I got accepted into the American Watercolor Society was this one, which uses, again, the same technique. I created an entire painting of abstraction, like I'm doing now, with all this texturing and color and pattern and so forth, and it was everywhere. And then I cut out stencils of these birds, and I went over and rolled an opaque white gesso around them. And the white gesso picks up the paint underneath. So it becomes, you know, it reflects what's here, but it leaves behind this image. And then I dribbled paint across and did a bunch of other things. The same thing with this painting, if you can see it. It was all abstraction and pattern. You can see these squares, you can see the circles, you can see that X I did. And I went around it with opaque white gesso, just enough to carve out the image of the bird. And that's what we're going to do today. Somebody asked me to do a moose. So I'm going to do a moose for you guys. But what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to create some of this colorful interest. So when you look at it, you have that all of that stuff going on within the shape that you're going to cut out. All right. Now, this is a very different process. Okay, this is much more intentional, but you use there was a lot of abstraction going on in some places, but I very carefully carved out a face. I went and flattened and lifted some areas to create, you know, shape around. And this is another way of using Yupo, where you're lifting to create, you know, pattern and shape. Somewhat unlike this one. This is sort of a combination of them. You can see a lot of this patterning and texturing that I'm doing in this painting, but on top of it, I superimposed figures. So lots of different ways to work with it. It's hard to demo everything. So I'm demoing what I think is the most interesting part of Yupo, which is this ability to come in and texture and lift and create abstraction. And then you can take it from there. Yes. Oh, you have to. If this is very fragile when you're done. Like I said, I can literally go in here and wipe away the paint. So I've tried a lot of different ones, and I've gotten to the point where I use a golden archival varnish, and I put on about 6 or 8 very light coats. You go very lightly and then let it dry, very lightly, let it dry. The last one might be a little, but you don't want varnish itself to start dissolving the paint. And you have to have it completely dry. Am I going in and out? Is that me? If it's not completely dry, you run the risk of the wet paint bubbling up through the varnish. But yes, the only way to do anything with these is to fix them like that. It's an acrylic varnish. Mineral spirit acrylic aerosol. Probably terrible for you. I do it outside so I don't have to breathe it. Harmful vapors may cause flash fire. But I've tried a lot of them, and this really works. Oh, all the time. You've seen me using paintbrushes, haven't you? Yeah. Oh. Well, I paint into shapes. I use stencils. Well, for instance, I don't like this color. Right in here, this brown is doing nothing for me. So I'm going to come in here. Lift a lot of it away and replace it with a red, I think, or violet. Red violet, maybe. I don't know what this looks like on the screen, but here I just replaced this with a brilliant red. It was a kind of a dull brown, and now it's not. And I don't want it to look like it's pasted on, so I'm going to come around it with some shapes and let it blend into what's around it a little bit more than that. But yeah, I use brushes a lot. Yes, you can, but you do it with this, with an aerosol. It's hard to do it with a brush because when you wet the area next to it, you lift it off. So if you want a softer edge or to blend something, give it a little spritz with this and that'll do it. How much time do I have? Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop with this, and I have another one that I brought that's a little further along that I can move to. This is the same process, same thing. Doesn't look that different, but it's got a little bit more. And I'm going to show you how to make a mousse out of it. I have a lot of these at home. These are stencils, and I cut them out of Tyvek. Okay, Tyvek is a very tough material that's used to frame houses to create a barrier, a water barrier, and it doesn't tear, so I cut a mousse out. Do you see the mousse? And I was looking at it like this and thinking, I put a little bird on its antler. And I thought, yeah, that might work. And I looked at it like that and I said, okay, I've got, this almost looks like an eye. There's some rest area over here and some good color coming through the interesting part. But let's try it the other way and see if that looks any better. And I did this, and I'll solicit your opinion. I thought that looked maybe a little bit better. I liked that better. The other thing you can do is switch it over like this. Try it facing the other way. This is a little bit fragile because my paper wasn't a lot bigger than my image. And that's kind of interesting too. All right, 1, 2, or 3? 1, 1, 2, 3. So the first way was like this, right? Yep. Okay. So this is the negative. Now we're going to pull out the positive. And here's the positive. Put the positive on here. Like so. And we could put the bird on, and the bird was, which way was the bird? Bird was this way. Put the bird on. Tape it down. Okay, now I don't want this to move while I'm working on it. So I'm just for fun going to take some tape. I've got a bunch of this really thin tape. Again, I thought I had more than that, but we'll use that. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, I bought this at Wet Paint too. So I'm just going to put some pieces of tape across. These will act like stencils too. They don't stick real well to the paper, but they work if you're careful. It's a masking tape. No, it's actually tape. It's just like masking tape, only it's really thin like this. Okay, if you're gonna, of course. Yep. Alcohol ink, I haven't worked with much. The difference between alcohol ink and watercolor is you can't lift it the way you do this. You can lift it with alcohol, but you can't just go into and lift it with water. You guys afraid of the tornado? No. Oh, you're going to miss the magic. I had I have a good friend, Mike Rada. Any of you guys know Mike? Mike was jurying a show one time, and he told a joke, and it was Timmy and Tommy who have no money and are hungry, and they're standing outside of a candy store, and they decide to go in and look at the candy store, and so they can't buy anything. So they go in, and when they come out, Timmy says to Tommy, says, "Look, I stole a couple of candy bars." And Tommy says, "You can't do that. That's illegal." And he says, "Yeah, but I'm so hungry." And he says, "Well, I think I can fix it. Let's go back inside." So they go inside, and Timmy says to the proprietor, he says, "Hey, you want to see a magic trick?" And the guy says, "Yeah, okay." So Timmy grabs a candy bar and eats it. The guy looks at him and says, "Okay." And so he says, "No, I'm not done yet." He says, he grabs another candy bar and he eats it. And the guy says, "Well, where's the magic?" And he says, "Well, look in Timmy's pocket." And the point was, when you're making a painting, or when, in his case, you're jurying a painting show, the question you have to ask is, where's the magic? Which painting is magic? Which painting grabs you and makes you think and makes you feel something? And just, there in any show, the Minnesota Watercolor Show is a good example. There were so many good paintings in that show. So many paintings that showed excellent composition, showed excellent design, showed good technique. And the winners are the ones that have some magic to them, some emotion, some emotional content, etc. And one of the things that I've found with Yupo is it's kind of almost magic all by itself. So I have to find one thing. I'm sorry I'm so disorganized here. I have some white gesso in here somewhere. Yeah, it's right there. Thank you. There's the magic. So I am going to roll out some white gesso, and you'll notice when I roll this on, I roll away from the stencil because I want to pick it up, and it'll start to pick up the color underneath it. So it won't be pure white. It'll start to get over here. You can see it's already getting fairly blue. And I'm not going to try to cover everything up. If a little bit of what's underneath starts showing through, that's good. Don't have any problem with that. Be careful with this bird because I want him to show. My wife told me, my wife's a birder. Okay. Are any of you guys birders? You've heard, the birds that sit on the cattle egret, and there's birds in Africa. She told me the name of the bird in Africa was a danger or something like that, a cattle danger, something like that. And I said, well, I'm going to put one on my moose. And she said, no, you can't do that. I said, why? She says, well, they don't sit on moose. And I said, well, it's a painting. No, you can't do that. Anybody who knows birds will know that's wrong. So I'm telling you right up front, this is not a realistic painting. Mostly because the birds don't sit on the moose's antlers. Yeah, it's magic. So I'm doing this fairly fast because before this dries, and you notice I've got a lot of color that's still coming through here, and I want to get even more. I'm going to take one of these and a clean roller. There's one. And I'm going to just pick up some of that and let it come through a little bit more. Remember I told you it picks it up? You see that? How some of that patterning is coming through. We want to do that in a couple places where we get, ooh, that's even different because I had that picked up the wrong roller there, but that's all right. Yeah, let's do, let me get that wrecked. Let's do one of these up here by the bird. The bird's sitting by the sun. Yeah. So these are just ways of putting a little bit more. I don't know what this is going to do. Let's see. Yeah. Some other things going on in the background, subtle things going on in the background. Not real obvious things. Okay, ready for the magic? All right, let's take off. There's the moose. And there's the imaginary bird. Now at this stage, I'll look at this and I'll say, oh, you know, parts of it are working. This has got good contrast. That bird needs something else up in there. This is too light compared to the white. So I'll go back in there and change that. And I might, oh, the other thing is I was working from an image and I brought the image, but I probably won't be able to find it. I just went online and Googled, you know, moose and stole an image off the internet. Here it is. So it'll be hard for you to see this, but I took this and I cropped it down and then I dropped it out on my computer and looked at it to see if the silhouette would actually work. And that's a handy thing to do if you have Procreate or one of those where you can put the image in and then color it and color the background and say, all right, I'm going to have a decent looking here for the people at home, decent. This is the image and this is this. And if I look at the image, one of the things that I would like to do maybe, and I'll just try it here. I might want to show that this comes down by lifting a little bit. Just the suggestion that there's something, and this would come down. You don't have to do this, but I'm just thinking it might make the moose image a little bit more definite. Yeah. All right, well, you're tough. All right. So at home, I would darken this area to make this stand out against this more and probably up in here. And I'm going to go ahead and, yeah. It's down there. I'm going to just show you how I would fix that bird head. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to lift and put some bright red on him. The red-headed moose bird. You've heard of the red-headed moose bird, right? My wife is a big birder, as I said, and she knows all the birds, and I'm always making up names for birds, and drives her crazy. There, the red-headed moose bird is standing out a little bit better now. And again, for these, to go in and just create some value up in here of some kind and texture it. So that those don't disappear into the background, and that's just final. So anyway, this is one way of working with Yupo. Anybody who wants to talk afterwards, I can go through some other ways. Do I have time to show one more? All right. This is another technique that I really like, and I've done in demos. And this is actually one of my favorite paintings. This came out of, I'm going to put it here so that people at home can see it. This was all just abstract, and this is a G clay. The actual painting was bigger, and I just lifted out these shapes and created a face. And when I got done, I created this little edge here to define that edge of the person. But there's not a lot of information there. People look at this and they go, you know what? But if you stand back and look at it, you can see the face. And all that is taking this abstract background and lifting out and replacing pieces of it with color. And this is a fairly subtle example of that, but a lot of my paintings are start out with an abstract background, and then shapes and textures are lifted into them to create an image. Yeah, it all looked like this, and I lifted out these shapes and put in color and pattern, and this is blue and yellow, but just to create a light sort of abstract pattern through it. And I like it that people look at this and say, oh, that's nice, what is it? And then they say, oh, wait a minute. You stand back a little. Oh, another way. Thank you. Yeah. Because the painting was largely blue, the gesso actually picked up the blue background. But in this case, I added some blue to it because I wanted it darker up here and darker down here and lighter in the middle. So instead of pure white, I did add some blue, and I did that in stages. I just did what I just did for you guys, and then I looked at it and I said, no, I want to do some more. And I put the geese back in, and then I dribbled. This is just colored gesso that I dribbled across to create pattern in there too. But the idea is to create a contrast between this, whatever it is, and this transparent. You get the opaque and the transparent, and you get contrast there that draws the eye too.
Give him a big hand. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. We have one more thing. Steve's got an award to give. And then those that got awards tonight too, there'll be pictures after, and then everybody can ask some questions.
Thank you. One of our